I wonder if some of us missed that. Hopefully you didn't. Great job, babe. BL kids, you are dismissed. And you should know that how this looks will be different next week. And Katie will come up at the end of the service and explain for all you parents. It's going to look a little different. Exciting, but different. And sometimes change can be scary, while at the same time being very exciting. They look a little lost. It's that way. Sorry, I got distracted. It happens. Hey, we are in the midst of a series that we're calling The Compassion of Christ. And if you remember, we looked at the word compassion, and in the English dictionary it talks about, I'll just read it to you, a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. And the word in the Greek, we talked about how it is used 12 times in the New Testament. And every single time it's used, it is wrapped around, it is centered around the person of Jesus Christ. Either someone is using it to describe how Jesus felt, Jesus himself is describing it as how he's feeling. A person asks for it from Christ. Show me compassion. The word is translated pity that we use, but it's the same word. And then Christ uses it in two parables. And if you look at a parable and you look at the upper heavenly meaning, it's referring to God's love. God is showing compassion. And so we're going to just walk right into some scripture and look at Christ's compassion. Now, this scripture in Matthew is Matthew 14. We won't show this part yet. I'm going to tell you, leading up to it, what's taking place. You got to remember, you got to know at this point who John the Baptist is. He was the cousin of Jesus, the blood cousin of Jesus. He also is the one who, in the prophecy, prepared the way for Jesus to come. He was teaching, he was preaching before Jesus Christ even began his ministry. John the Baptist is the one who baptized Jesus, which started off Christ into the ministry that he did for the next 3 years. You could assume that John and Jesus know each other, and they're on some level at least friends. If Jesus is going to pick his, best people for his team, that's how he chose. He certainly would have chosen John at his first pick. That's not how Christ chose, but John is like the guy right beneath Jesus when it comes to teaching and preaching with authority and people coming to understand or have a better understanding of who God is because of his teaching. John the Baptist gets arrested by King Herod. King Herod is the Jewish king of the area. I use the word Jewish king with these little finger thingies because he's a puppet. He is the guy the Roman emperor put in charge so that the Jewish people would think, hey, we still have a guy in the seat who understands and relates to us. He's a Jewish person, we'll obey him. We're not really underneath the thumb of Rome. It's all a lie. It's all a ruse. And the King Herod's authority, his power is dependent on his ability to keep the peace. If the Jewish people rebel and revolt, the king looks bad, and the Roman emperor will just find a new puppet to take a seat. I don't really need you there. You're just convenient. And so the king has John arrested because John begins preaching against King Herod's marriage to his own brother's wife, Herodias. And he says that's unlawful. You can't do that. And King Herod, being the king, arrests him. But he's afraid to have him killed. Why? Because if he has him killed, the people who like John might revolt. It makes King Herod look bad, and that is not good for King Herod. So he has him arrested, thrown in a cell, and hopefully things will just die down eventually. Only problem is his new wife isn't happy about John's words either. Imagine that. And his wife's daughter does a dance for the king at a party with a lot of influential people in the room. And it pleases the king so well, he says, hey, anything you want, you ask for, I'll give it to you. And her mother tells her, ask for the head of John the Baptist. And the king, looking around the room, sees people who are important. If he says no, he'll look bad. And we can't have that, can we? And so he goes through that. He has John the Baptist beheaded, and he serves his head on a silver platter to his stepdaughter. A little morbid. It's in the Bible. Okay, so what happened? Why that story? Because you have to have that context to be able to read this next section with any kind of clarity. Matthew 14, verse 13 through 14. Now, when Jesus heard about John, his execution, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. Okay, the author, Matthew, is making it very clear and intentional. Christ is on purpose retreating from the masses. Why? I would tell you, he is hurting for his friend. There's a sense of loss here. But Jesus is fully God. How could he knows that John's in a better place. He knows it for a fact. He is totally all God, yeah, but he's also fully man at the same time. And so knowing this, that he's in heaven, knowing that John's in a better place, doesn't eliminate the fact that he is gone from this earth. And the way John was taken is not a pleasant one. I have to believe that Jesus is retreating in order to mourn and grieve for his friend. But what happens? And when the people heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd. Now just picture this, guys. You've been there. You've been hurting. You've been discouraged. You've wanted to be isolated in order to process and to just be alone. And when someone knocks on your door, what do you say? Go away. Christ could have said, guys, I just need some time. I'll get back to you later. Let me have my moment. Are you so insensitive that you can't see I'm hurting? If that had been written in here, we all would have said, I understand that. I don't fault Christ for that. I would feel the exact same way. But he doesn't say that. What does he say? Well, what does he do, I guess is more important. He saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them. And he healed their sick. You see, he delayed his mourning. He delayed his grief so that he could administer to the needs of the people when he felt the compassion to do so. How many times have I, in my grief, for whatever reason, have told people, no, I know you have a need, and I feel this desire to help you with it, but I have my own needs too. And I'm going to say no to you in order to say yes to myself. And don't mishear me. It's very important that you take care of yourself. I'm not suggesting otherwise. And Christ, after this, and he does his healing, he then is able to go by himself again and spend time by himself. He delays it, but he does process it. It appears. And so you have to, at some point, say no. In our staff, we have all kinds of types of personalities. And some people in our staff have a lot of compassion. I would say too much compassion. They're taken advantage of. I'm not going to say who that is. Some of us in staff meeting have no compassion. Maybe me, a little bit sometimes. Okay, I struggle with that. Honestly, I do. And so we have to be accountable to each other. And I'll say sometimes to some of them, you're being run over. You got to start saying no. And there's times when they're like, you're just being a jerk. I hear that a lot, don't I? And so we gotta work through that. But the point is, when you feel compassion and you feel that God is drawing you towards doing something, what did Christ do? He did it. He showed the compassion. What do? Oftentimes I'll choose myself over what God is calling me to do. And what do you do? A little bit of both, I imagine. Matthew 15, verse 29 through 39. Departing from there, Jesus went along by the Sea of Galilee, and having gone up on the mountain, he was sitting there. And large crowds came to him, bringing with them those who were lame, crippled, blind, mute, and many others. And they laid them down at his feet, and he healed them. So the crowd marveled as they saw the mute speaking, the crippled restored, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they glorified the God of Israel. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I feel compassion for the people, because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat, and I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might faint on the way. Okay, do you see what's happening here? Okay, let's put it in our context. Okay, if I'm here at the church or on a hillside and I'm preaching, and I'm sure you all would do this, you're going to gather around me and hear my teachings, right? Obviously. For 3 days straight, I'm going to tell you, because I have no compassion, bring your own food. Like, come prepared. Or leave and come back. Like, so I'm thinking through, like, Christ is, I'm thinking Christ is like, why don't you bring your own food? He didn't say that. You see, Christ at this point is done teaching. He's going to move on to the next city or the next place. He can leave them feeling like, I have fulfilled my commitment, my job to you in this moment. I've preached all that I need to preach to you. I'm on to the next place. Take care of yourself now. Okay, you can do that. You're released. But no, he's worried about these people even after he's going to leave. They might faint on the way home. We can't have that. And so what does he do? He says, I have compassion. And in verse 33, the disciples said to him, where would we get so many loaves in this desolate place to satisfy such a large crowd? What are you hearing? We're hearing excuses. How many times when we're driving down the road or we feel this need for compassion, and what do? We begin telling ourselves excuses. And the further down the road we get, the more excuses we're able to tell ourselves, and we justify not doing that which God has called us to do. I'm too busy. I have somewhere to be. But Christ didn't hear excuses. He didn't respond to excuses. He said in verse 34, and Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? And they said 7, and a few small fish. He directed the people to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and giving thanks, he broke them and started giving them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the people. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 7 large baskets full. And those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. Almost every time Christ feels compassion, it is followed by a miracle. Almost every single time. In verse 39, and sending away the crowds, Jesus got into the boat and came to the region of Magadan. Like, we have to take note of what did Christ do? Why did he do it? Because he felt compassion and he chose to act on that compassion. Mark 1, 35 through 45. This to me is an incredible revelation that as I was reading it, I realized something I had never seen before. This section of scripture is right after Christ goes, and he actually is at the house of Simon and Andrew, and their mother is sick, and he heals her, and she begins attending him and taking care of the house again. Okay, and it says that he is able to close the door as the crowds are coming in to meet him in this house. Okay, picture this. People are gathering all around the house that he's staying in, and he can close the door and do what? Have isolation, have a moment, have privacy, something we all need. He was fully human. He needed his privacy. He needed to rest. And in the house, he can close the door. Why are you hammering this so hard? Because what happens next, if you don't see this next part makes little significance. But if you see this, what happens next is even more incredible. In the early morning, while it was still dark, he's in the house. He slept in the house with his disciples are there. He got up. He left the house and went away to a secluded place and was praying there. Whole sermon on that part, right? How often do we get up early and go pray? Verse 36, Simon and his companions searched for him. They found him and said to him, everyone is looking for you. So what happened? The people came knocking on the door. Where is Jesus? We don't know where he's at. We'll go find him for you. They find him by himself and they say, hey, there's people looking for you. And he said to them, verse 38, let us go somewhere else to the towns nearby so that, this is huge, if you got your markers or pens, underline it, highlight it, whatever, so that I may preach there also. For that is what I came for. Last week I told you, Christ came to proclaim the good news of the kingdom. He didn't come to perform miracles. That was extra. That's not why he came. He did a lot of that. Why? Well, I would argue because he felt compassion. And he couldn't see his people hurting and not do something. But he says here very clearly, I came here to preach. And here's, some of you are thinking, you're right, Jesus came to preach because he's a preacher. I'm not a preacher. That word preach also means to proclaim. So you're not off the hook. A little side note there for you. So that's what I came for, verse 39. And he went into their synagogues throughout all Galilee, preaching or proclaiming and casting out demons. He didn't even saying I came to preach, he didn't just stop there. He cast out demons as well. Why? I would say he had compassion. Verse 40, and a leper came to Jesus, beseeching him and falling on his knees before him and saying, if you are willing, not if you are able, not if you can, if you are willing, you can make me clean. What does that mean? A leper in that culture is considered unclean. If you read Leviticus, a whole chapter, like 40, 50 verses in that chapter, talks about the process of discovering whether a person has leprosy or not. If they might have leprosy, you put them in isolation for 7 days and check on them again. And if it's decided they have leprosy by a priest, they are considered unclean forever until they are healed of it. And a lot of people never were. They had communities of just lepers living in caves. Because if you're unclean, you can't be around people. Because you make them unclean. And if they're unclean, they make other people. It's like this plague. Make me clean. Verse 41, moved with compassion, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. He touched him. Did you catch that? He's a leper. If Christ touches him by the culture standards, Christ is no longer considered clean. He doesn't care. He touches him and said to him, I am willing. be cleansed. Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. And he sternly warned him. This is confusing at first. He sternly warned him and immediately sent him away. And he said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone." Why? Why keep it a secret? We'll get to that. But go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Go to the priest, he will look you over, he'll declare you are clean, and now you can go home. But the man, he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the news around to such an extent that Jesus could no longer publicly enter a city. But he stayed out in unpopulated areas, and they were coming to him from everywhere. Okay, if you read past that, you miss this. He left a house where he could close the door and have privacy. He tells the people, his disciples, they're coming for you. He says, let's go to the next town because I came here to preach. He goes to the city. He's headed there to preach. A man stops him, wants a miracle. Christ knows, if I do this, people will come to such an extent that I can't do that which I came to do in the way that I plan to do it. It's inconvenient. It's one person. I can easily move past him and heal many other people, make up for it. If I heal him, word gets around too fast, and I can't make it in the city to preach. What would we do? What would you do? What I have been called to do is so important that I would not dare risk it to do what compassion has called me to do. I'm heading to church, assuming I live further away than I do. I'm almost like next door. And I'm heading, and I have a purpose. I'm supposed to preach today. And there's a car on the side of the road broken down. I can't fix it. That's not me. But I can give them a ride. Except I have somewhere I need to be. And my job's important. Like I feel that God has called me to do it. But maybe the way that I do it isn't really necessarily how God requires it. But see, in my mind, I got a job to do, and so somebody else will help them. Surely, let me get to work to do that which God has called me to do. Let me ignore the compassion that God is drawing out of me in order to do that which God has called me to do. God does not contradict himself. Maybe I can do both. Christ didn't say to the leper, if I heal you, I can't go and preach the way that I've been called to preach. No, it just looks different now. He has to go out in unpopulated areas and the crowds come. He loses the door. There are no walls. It's free access to Christ all day, every day. Inconvenient? Absolutely. Exhausting? I can't even imagine. But the compassion drove him, and he said yes, and he acted on it. Luke 15:11 through 32. This is the last parable in a series of what we call the lost parables. They're not lost because they're actually they're hard to find. They're lost because they're about lost things, about a lost coin, about a lost sheep, and now we have a lost son. A parable, if you don't know, is we use this really cool way to describe it. It's an earthly message. A message we can all understand here on this level, here on a straight up level where it makes sense. That guy did this, I understand that, makes sense. But it also has a layer to it of a heavenly meaning. Earthly message with a heavenly meaning. There's something else in the story to help us understand God. And Christ loved telling parables because it confused people. It made them laugh a little bit. But also because as we keep reading it over time, we just find more stuff in them. And he said, well, and this is in response to some people grumbling about Christ. It says, this man receives sinners and he eats with them. And they're grumbling about Christ being with people who were considered unworthy, who were considered dirty, and they're sinners. Verse 11, and he said, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. Okay, in that culture, men especially worked really hard, fathers, to leave some inheritance for their kids, the sons. It's unfortunate, but it's just their culture. And so the first son got the most share, but then other sons after would get a portion if the man had enough to give. This man must have had some extra money. He was able to give to his younger son. And the son knows, I got money coming to me, but if I wait for you to die to get it, I might be too old to enjoy it. I want it now. I got things I want to do. And you have to, it's very important that you try to hear this story from Christ, this parable from Christ, as if you're on the sideline watching Christ tell it. And try to hear what they're hearing. Okay, they have sons. Surely, they are hoping to leave an inheritance for their children. If one of their kids were to ask them to pay up now, they would be angry. They would be hurt. They'd be crushed. So they can understand this story really well because they've lived it on some level. So he divided his wealth between them, and not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country. That distant country is key. He left the home of his father. He left the land of his people into a land full with foreign gods, foreign cultures, and rampant sin. If you were on the sideline hearing this story from Christ, you're saying, oh, no, he didn't. They're angry. They're frustrated. They might even say, we have a law. If a son is disobedient enough times, we can take him to the elders and have him stoned to death. This son doesn't deserve the wealth that you gave him. He doesn't deserve to be your son. He should have had him killed. Oh, I'm so angry. That's the story, right? That's what they're hearing. And there he squandered his estate with loose living. What does that mean? Use your imagination. Now, when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. Now, the men next to Christ are getting their popcorn out, and this is good stuff. Today, you would say, that's karma, right? I don't believe in karma, but it's kind of the idea, right? He gets what's coming to him. This is getting good, Jesus. This is getting good. He's going to get what's coming to him. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his field to feed swine, pigs, the unclean of the unclean. You can't even touch them. They're disgusting animals in their culture. And he has to feed them. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. The people hearing the story are like, this is getting really good. This is awesome. Right? But Christ has something else in store. But when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? I will get up. I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. And the men next to Christ are thinking, when he goes back there, he'll become the man's slave. It's going to be awesome. So he got up and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, and the people are like, here it goes, here it comes, it's going to be good. His father saw him and felt compassion for him. And you got to picture these men who's eating the popcorn, their jaw just drops. That's not a good story. And he ran, and he embraced him, and he kissed him. And the son said to his father, said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight." That is true. "I am no longer worthy to be called your son." That is also true. He's not worthy. But Sam, that's mean. Yeah, it is. And it's true. Okay, my value, I have a high value in justice. That's where I struggle. Right and wrong is, I struggle with right and wrong very hardly, very strongly. Like, I want justice to be served. That's why my compassion is a little bit lower than justice. He is not worthy. The father does not refute that fact. But the father said to his slaves, "Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found." And they began to celebrate. The father was not ignorant of what his son had been doing. He knew full well. The man left the pigs. He's filthy. He's disgusting. He is unclean. The father didn't care. He ran just like Christ touching the leper. This father grabs his son and elevates him back, because all he cares about is, my son has come home. Compassion is something that God is waiting to show us. Compassion is something that we cannot choose to ignore. It's something that we are called to act on, not just feel it. I asked you last week, do you even feel compassion? Or has something in your past hindered that? Or has something in your experiences damaged that? Or maybe like me, and you just struggle in general with who you are, with experiencing compassion. Can you begin praying, "God, help me to have a soft heart. Help me to feel compassion." And then when you feel it, here's the question: what do you do with it? Do you bury it down deep because it's inconvenient? Because it makes you vulnerable? Or do you act on it? I'm so thankful because this parable, the earthly message is simply a father and a son. But as most of you know, this heavenly message is the man, the son is us. And the father is God. And these men eating popcorn next to Christ, they want God to rain down justice. But God came to show compassion. As our team comes up to close in this song, I want to ask you some questions. Have you accepted the compassion of Christ? What does that mean? Have you come to the Father, to God, and asked Him to be your dad? Because He's waiting for you to come. Maybe I have a long time ago, but I've just lost my way. I don't really know God the way that I think I should, or I want to. I want to know. God is still waiting, watching for you to come down the road. But I'm not worthy. I'm broken. I'm messed up. Yeah, you are. Absolutely. And God doesn't care. He loves you. And so maybe you don't know what to do with that. I want to encourage you to come to the altar. These are altars, they're made of wood. A long time ago, that meant that people would sacrifice cows on there in order to pay for their sin, to cover their debt, to cover their mistakes. That's not necessary anymore. That's next week, by the way. And now we use them for a place to experience God, to be at the Father, to humble ourselves and come and lay down that which has kept us distant from Him. It's also a place to just come and be with God. It's a physical surrender. If you want to come and pray with someone, I want you to come to this side, this altar right here. Someone will come and pray with you. If you want to come and be by yourself, come and pray here at this altar right here. But these altars are open. They're for you to be with the Father.